What do you think strength is? The ability to harm others, or the ability not to need to? There are mornings when a samurai stands still on a step for a long time, not because of fear, but because he is choosing where the next step will lead. Bushido does not only teach how to defeat an enemy, it teaches how to face the person in front of you, without turning them into an enemy. If true strength does not reside in the blade, then why were the most ruthless warriors taught compassion? And if compassion is a form of discipline, have you ever trained it? When the question of strength has no answer yet, the story does not end in philosophy. It begins with a specific person, on a very real morning, where every choice leaves a mark. That morning in the village at the edge of the mountains always begins early, before the sun rises above the horizon. The stone steps at the gate of the garrison are cold and damp. A man stands there, back straight, hands relaxed, in no hurry to place the first step. He has stood like this for many mornings in a row. He is a samurai, not famous. He carries no tales of glory to recount. The sword at his side is cleaned every day, but rarely drawn. Those around him know him more for his quiet presence than for loud action. When conflict arises, he arrives last. When voices clash, he is often the one who stays silent the longest. The world he lives in is not free of violence. Land disputes, debts, small frictions that can quickly turn into bloodshed. He has been trained to resolve such matters with force if necessary, but whenever he is given a choice, he pauses. He stands on the step. He looks at his own foot before moving forward. There is something in him that does not allow immediate action. Not hesitation, but a different awareness guiding his movement. When he encounters a beggar at the village gate, he does not turn away. When he sees the weak being humiliated, he does not answer with a fist. He chooses another way, slower, harder. His desire is not to win one more fight. What he seeks is a kind of strength that leaves no wounds on others. And every morning, in silence, he asks himself whether he has the discipline to keep choosing that path. The crisis did not arrive with the sound of drums or clashing blades. It began with a familiar morning disrupted. On the steps before the village gate where he usually stood in silence, there were others this time. A group of warriors from a neighboring region appeared, carrying urgency and eyes constantly searching for a reason to prove their strength. A small dispute spread quickly. A word misunderstood, a step taken too fast. In moments, a circle of onlookers closed in. Eyes turned toward him. They knew he was a samurai. They waited for the familiar response. A sword drawn. The matter ending in the fear of the weaker one. He did not do it. He stood still. On the cold step, his foot neither advanced nor retreated. The silence stretched beyond what people could tolerate. One breath, then another. That silence tightened the air more than any shout could. His choice was mistaken for weakness. Mockery followed. One man stepped closer, deliberately invading his space. This was the moment everything he had been taught demanded immediate action. It was also the moment the path he had chosen came under question not only by others, but by himself. If he did not draw his sword, order would collapse. If he did draw it, everything he was trying to preserve would vanish. He felt the weight of that choice, clearly not in his hand, but in the step that had not yet been taken. In the end, the situation was diffused by someone else. There was no victory, no clear defeat. But when the crowd dispersed, something remained. The path he had chosen placed him in a more dangerous position than any duel ever could. For the first time, he understood that compassion was not only difficult, it was lonely. And if he wished to continue, he would have to pay a price. The turning point did not come immediately after the incident. It arrived later, on another morning, when the steps before the village gate were emptier than usual. No expectant eyes, no whispers behind his back, only silence, stretching long enough that thoughts had nowhere left to hide. He met the man not on a battlefield, but at the edge of the village. An old man sat repairing a fence collapsed by the night's rain, hands trembling, back bent, movements so slow they seemed to go nowhere. He stopped, not because he was asked for help, simply because he could not keep walking while seeing that scene. He set his sword on the ground so his hands were free. No one watched, no praise followed. Only wooden planks slowly lifted back into place. The work took longer than he expected. When it was finished, more than half the morning had passed. The steps were still there, waiting for his return. The old man did not speak much. He looked at him for a long moment, then asked a short question, as if it had been waiting all along. You train your sword every day, so what do you train to know when not to draw it? The question did not require an immediate answer. It followed him on the walk back, in every step, in the silence between breaths. He understood that what he was doing was not avoiding strength, but learning a different way to use it. From that morning on, he no longer stood on the steps waiting for others to react. He stood there to examine himself. Each time he chose not to act, he treated it as a form of training, quiet, unrecognized, repeated, steady, like the way a true warrior builds strength. His resolve was never announced. It was proven by continuing down the harder path, where compassion was not instinct, but discipline. The morning began before the village awoke. While the sky was still dark, he had already sat up. There was no call, no reminder, only the quiet space between two breaths. Enough for him to know that if he lay back down even a little longer, the entire day would drift forward on old momentum. He stepped out of bed. The wooden floor was cold beneath his bare feet. Outside, the steps before the gate were still swallowed by darkness. He dressed slowly, careful not to let a single movement become hurried. The sword remained where it was. This morning was not for it. When he stood on the steps, the early wind cut through sharply enough to awaken every sense. No one saw him. No one knew how long he had been awake. The first step was always the hardest, not for the body, but for the mind, which still tried to bargain, to find a reason to delay. He let the silence stretch for one more breath, then placed his foot down. He walked, not to arrive anywhere, only to move while the world was still unlit. Each step followed the same rhythm, not faster, not slower. When fatigue came, he did not stop immediately. When it felt easy, he did not quicken his pace. The morning passed in a steadiness that bordered on severity. There was no sense of victory, no moment of elation, only one small change. As the sun began to rise, he realized he was still walking, not because of motivation, but because he had not allowed himself to stop that day. And many days after, the morning became the place where he trained the most elusive thing of all, not strength but authority over the first step. And with each silent dawn that passed this way, he understood that discipline does not begin with grand actions, but with the refusal to betray the smallest choice one makes with oneself. The mornings no longer differed from one another. The steps were still cold. The wind still blew from the same direction. His feet still met the ground with the same steady rhythm. There were no signs of progress nor milestone to mark that today mattered more than yesterday. He repeated small, unnoticed acts, helping rebuild a roof after the rain, carrying water for someone who could no longer walk far, listening to a story longer than necessary, then leaving without offering advice. Each action resembled the one before it so closely that if he skipped a day, no one would notice the difference. That very monotony began to test him, not through pain, but through quiet doubt. When things could be resolved more quickly with force, why choose the longer path? When no one demanded it, why continue at all? There were mornings when he stood on the steps longer than usual, not to contemplate anything lofty, but simply to see whether he still had patience for his own choice. The first step slowed. His breathing lengthened. The morning passed without leaving any clear mark. Yet it was precisely in those uneventful days that a silent change took shape. He no longer searched for reasons to help, nor did he force himself to act according to any standard. Pausing, listening, and choosing the gentler way began to happen without preparation. When he noticed this, he understood that he was no longer trying to be compassionate. Repetition had worn away resistance. Compassion did not arise as a sudden emotion, but as a habit forged over time. In that monotony, another kind of strength was forming slowly and durably. The storm arrived without warning. Heavy rain, fierce wind, battering roofs already worn thin. The morning was torn apart by relentless impacts. The steps before the village gate turned slick, water running in thin streams beneath the hurried feet of others. He woke as he always did, no earlier, no later, standing on the steps, his clothes already soaked, wind cutting through the seams. This morning did not allow hesitation. Still, he stood one breath longer, to be sure the next step did not come from reflex. The work that day was unlike the days before. The familiar quiet was gone. Someone was injured trying to hold a door. Someone panicked, shouting, searching for a hand strong enough to lean on. Everything happened at once, forcing decisions while his body endured cold and exhaustion. He took on the heaviest tasks, bracing a collapsing pillar, holding a door against the wind, standing in front of another when roof tiles fell. His footing slipped more than once, but each time he rose, he did not look around for recognition. He simply reset his position and continued. In the midst of the storm, there was a very brief moment when everything seemed to stop. The rain still fell, the wind still roared, but within him there was no resistance, no question of why he was doing this. Only movement following movement, as if long practiced. When the storm passed, the village grew strangely quiet. The steps were coated in mud. The morning had slipped away without anyone noticing. He stood there, slowing his breath, letting rainwater drip from his sleeves. No victory was declared. No thanks rang out loudly. But from that day on, he understood more clearly what he was training. Compassion is not meant only for favorable conditions. It must stand firm against headwinds and the weight of circumstance. And if it is not tempered in storm and strain, it will break the moment it is most needed. After the storm, everything became easier in a dangerous way. The paths were cleared, roofs repaired, life returned to its familiar order. It was precisely in such days that the real test began. A different path was suggested to him. No one said it outright, but the implication was clear. If he were willing to overlook a few principles, things would move more smoothly, less stopping, less listening, less allowing his heart to be slowed by matters not directly tied to the task that morning. He stood on the steps longer than usual, not out of indecision, but because he recognized this choice by another familiarity. It did not threaten, it promised relief. Just step a little faster and everything would be simpler. He looked down at his feet. If he moved forward, no one would object. If he turned another way, no one would stop him. The silence lingered long enough for every justification to surface and then dissolve. In the end, he stepped down the old way. There was no sense of sacrifice, no sharp tension, just a choice maintained when no one required it to be maintained. That was what made it harder than all the trials before. In the days that followed, temptation appeared again and again, each time gentler in form. A quiet omission, a quick nod, a shortened step. Each time he returned to his morning, back to the steps, back to the silence before action. His unyielding spirit did not show itself by opposing the world. It lay in the ability not to compromise with himself, even when no one was watching. And in that quiet steadfastness, compassion ceased to be a noble option. It became a foundation that could not be removed. There came a morning when he realized he no longer had to remind himself to pause. The steps were still there, cold as always, yet his feet stopped naturally, not to think longer but because there was nothing left to struggle with inside. The things he did now unfolded without mental preparation. When someone needed help, he was already there before the question was spoken. When conflict arose, his presence alone was enough to slow everything down. No one called it strength, but everyone felt it. Morning continued to serve as an anchor. In silence, he moved along familiar paths, his steps steady and sure, not to prove anything, but to keep himself aligned with a rhythm that had been forged over time. Discipline was no longer an effort, it had become the way he existed. Some people began to look at him differently, not because of what he said, but because of what he did not do. He did not push forward, he did not impose, he did not need a sword to create distance. Any aura he carried did not come from feats of battle, but from unbroken consistency. When he stood on the steps at the end of that morning, sunlight slanted across the village yard. Silence settled for a brief moment. He placed his foot down without hesitation. Compassion was no longer a principle to remember, it had become a reflex, shaped by long discipline. The final trial did not come when he wasn't his weakest. It came when everything seemed settled. Morning still arrived on time. The steps were still familiar. His stride carried the certainty of habit. And it was precisely then that a situation arose large enough to demand everything he had trained. A conflict erupted at the center of the village. This was no minor clash. Two groups stood facing each other, tension drawn tight, each convinced they had been wronged. Words sharpened quickly. Someone fell. The crowd pressed in. A space collapsed, demanding that someone step forward and end it. All eyes turned to him. This time, if he drew his sword, no one would object. If he used force, order would be restored immediately. The easy path lay open, clearer than ever. But if he did that, all those years of standing in silence each morning would lose their meaning. And if he did nothing, everything might spiral beyond control. He stepped onto the stone steps between the two groups. He did not move toward either side. He did not retreat. He simply stood still. A sudden silence fell heavy enough for everyone to feel it. His feet did not move, yet his presence slowed the breath of those around him. He gave no orders, offered no explanation. He only placed his sword on the ground before him. The gesture was slow enough to be seen, clear enough to be unmistakable. That morning seemed to stretch longer than usual. Each passing second could have been the beginning of violence or its end. At last, one person stepped back, then another, not because they were persuaded, but because there was no longer a reason to continue. The crowd dispersed, leaving an empty space where he stood. There were no cheers, no victory to be claimed. When it was over, he remained on the steps for a long moment, not to reassure himself that he had been right, but to ask, if he could not hold this discipline today, would all the mornings before still have meaning? And if you were in that moment, would you choose familiar strength, or the silent path forged over so much time? The next morning brought no obvious change. The steps were still there, familiar enough to be overlooked. The early wind still moved gently across the village yard. Yet when he paused before the first step, something had changed without needing a name. He no longer stood there to restrain himself as before. Silence was no longer a test. It had become the natural space in which decisions appeared at the right time. When his foot came down, it carried neither hesitation nor the need for validation. Those around him began to behave differently, though no one spoke of why. Arguments softened sooner. Words were chosen with greater care, not because he was everywhere, but because his presence had changed how people understood strengths before. He was known as a warrior who could end things quickly. Now, he was remembered as the one who made it unnecessary for things to end in violence. That transformation did not happen in a single moment. It was the result of countless mornings in which he chose to pause rather than advance. As he walked through the village, no one bowed in fear, no one stepped aside. A different kind of distance emerged, not created by a sword, but by trust. Eyes no longer searched for protection, but for steadiness. At the end of that morning, he returned to the steps one last time. Silence gathered briefly. He stood there not as someone who had completed a journey, but as someone who had become the path itself. The transformation was not visible on the outside. It lay in the fact that he no longer had to choose between strength and compassion. The two had become one. There are mornings when you stand on your own set of steps. No one urges you forward. No one is watching. There is only a foot waiting to be placed. And in that quiet moment, You always have more than one choice. This story does not say that strength is wrong. It asks a different question instead. Have you trained enough discipline to know when you don't need to use it? Compassion, if it is not practiced every day, disappears the moment circumstances turn harsh. Tomorrow, when morning arrives, you can choose to pause for one more beat. Watch your step before you move forward, not to become better in the eyes of others, but to avoid losing the very thing that keeps you human. And if true discipline is not measured by how much you do, but by what you refuse to do, then what will your next choice be? If this story made you stop and reflect, share it with someone who needs a moment of silence like this. And if you want to keep walking this path, subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring these unnamed mornings together. Download as audio